And welcome back to Pokemon Team Creation Series. Today's Pokemon Team Creation Series suggestion or request comes to us from Parker Smith, who asked the question, what is Austin Powers Pokemon Team, baby? Yeah! My terrible Austin Powers impression. We already did Dr. Evil. Stands to reason we'd have to do Austin Powers at some point. Half of Austin's team actually came to me pretty easily, surprisingly. It was the second half of the team that was not as easy. I'd even go so far as to say 66% of this team, 2/3 of this team came, but 4 of these mod came without too much difficulty. The other 2 I had to kind of ponder on. So, I mean, if you've seen an Austin Powers movie, you know exactly what this character is about. He is a pastiche, a parody of James Bond. He is a super spy with a mojo to seduce the women, but he always gets his man in the end, baby. Yeah. So let's get the ones out of the way that were pretty easy for me. It's the only secret agent Pokemon we have in Pokemon, and that's Inteleon. Inteleon came to me pretty much as almost the first Mon that came to my head. Now, granted, is this a little more serious than Austin is? Oh, 100% it is. 100%. But it is a secret agent. It's designed after a spy. It still uses its finger as a water gun to shoot like water bullets. Austin, despite his silliness, is still capable combatant and knows how to fire a gun and is generally is relatively skilled with it. In a fight, like James Bond would kick his ass, but still. Inteleon was the obvious one. Another Mon I knew I had to have on team is one that represents his other physical capabilities, which is the constant judo chop, judo throw, judo flip, constantly saying judo, judo, judo. Well, I'm like, all right, he knows judo. There is no specific Pokemon out there that knows judo. However, there is a Mon that is a representation of that style of fighting. He is one half of a pair, and that is Throw. Throw is the defensive martial arts style Pokemon that's more of a grappler, more of a thrower, tosser, all that, incorporating martial arts like Judo. Judo is that style of martial art where it's not about striking and attacking. It's about defensive, using your opponent's momentum against them, twist, turns, grapples, locks, all that. That's what Throw's more designed for, whereas Swak is more of the quick attack, aggressive style of fighting and combat. So Throw is the one that made it onto the team in that case. Then, and I have 2 Pokemon here that actually represent this, because it lent a little bit more towards, I'll explain what this next Mon is also a representation of in just a second. But we need something. When you have Austin Powers, you need something. You need a Mon that represents the mojo, baby. That X factor that just makes him irresistible. Men want him to be him. Women want him and men want to be him, and sometimes the other way around. And so I'm like, okay, I need a seductive Pokemon. I need a Pokemon that seduces other Pokemon. That's Salazzle. Salazzle is a perfect femme fatale seducer of other Pokemon, particularly other Salandits, but other Pokemon in general. It's a Pokemon that can also move to learn Attract, which by all account is Mojo in the Pokemon world. And it does represent all the Powers girls, if you will. His equivalent of the Bond girls. Vanessa, Felicity Shagwell, Foxy Cleopatra. It represents all of them. Honestly, I see a lot of Vanessa. I see a lot of Vanessa in this Pokemon, honestly. I got a lot more Elizabeth Hurley than I do Beyonce or Heather Graham. But yeah, Salazzle represents part of his mojo, as well as the Powers women. This is where things started to get a little tricky. This one, I was able to use this one. I was kind of wanting to use a Miraidon or Miraidon for it, but they're not really time travel Pokemon. They're paradox Pokemon. Spoilers for Scarlet and Violet a little bit, but it's not really that big a spoiler. You could kind of connect the dots. So I'm like, that's not really time travel necessarily. So what did I use basically to represent the fact that in 2 out of 3 of his films, he has traveled through time? And he's done it multiple times. So I needed a time travel Pokemon, and that'd be Celebi. Now, Celebi, to be honest, would not really be like an integral part of his team. Like, this is not a Mon that is actually on his belt constantly. This is probably a Mon he can call on to help. Probably like a Pokemon Ranger or something like that. Or it's a Mon he can call on to help in battle, but he doesn't. It's under his command, and it'll help him when he asks, but he doesn't carry it on his belt. But still, Celebi is the time traveling Pokemon, and there you go. I didn't want to go Dialga because honestly, that just seemed like overkill. So there you go. And these last two were difficult. Because after you get past Mojo, Judo Flip, Judo Shop, Secret Agent, and Time Travel, because he's such a parody and there's not a huge amount of other things about him that stand out, the last two were really difficult to figure out because there's just not much else there. Well, you could go, what about the penis enlarger pump gag? I'm like, what the hell Pokemon is a representation of a Swedish-made penis enlarger pump? Seriously. If someone could, you know what? Seriously, comments below. Can you give me an equivalent of a penis enlarger pump for a Pokemon? Have at that. But no, I'm like, legitimately, I'm like, I struggle with thinking like, okay, what else can I use? What else can I do? And I thought about it more. I'm like, well, Salazzles are only female. Is there a male Pokemon that can learn Attract that I can use also on the team, just to get the male side of it down? Because Austin Powers is a guy, he is a womanizer, all that. So it makes sense. So I'm like, okay, and I'm like, Scarlet and Violet's like, not a lot of Pokemon in this gen can learn Attract. That doesn't make any sense. They clearly haven't updated this list yet. So I'm like, okay, let's move back to Gen 8. I'm like, okay, Gen 8, now we got the whole list. And I'm thinking on it, okay, and I'm like, I gotta go further. It can't just learn Attract. It's gotta be something that could really have a bit more of that something that would fit his personality. So it's like, come on, let's go party, yeah. It's like, yeah. And Pokemon's like, ah. It's like, so I'm like, okay, and I'm going through the list. And I'm thinking on it, and then I remembered one episode of the anime when I crossed the paths, when I looked on the list and saw one specific Mon. I'm like, wait a minute. It can learn Attract. I like this. Let's get a little meta here. And Golduck. Do you remember, folks, little boys and girls, back in the early 2000s, or early 2000s, late 90s, in the Orange Islands part of the anime, where Misty thought her Psyduck evolved. As it turned out, there was a wild Golduck that was just trying to impress girls. It's the Pokemon equivalent of Brock. I'm like, yes, this works. It's wild. It can have a fun-loving personality. It's trying to impress the lady mons. Like, I like this idea. So there you go. There's your male equivalent right there. But last but not least, and I've never used a Golduck on my team before. One of these days I'll have to try that. One of these days I'll have to try that. But last but not least, this, I'm like, okay, what else can I do? And that's what I'm like, this is probably the loosest one I could come up with. This one is very much an interchangeable Mon. But this is what I decided to go with. I was constantly thinking of, okay, look, he's a man who's out of time. Who's out of time. He's out of time, Mr. Paz. No, I was like, he's a man out of his own time period. He's a man from the 60s, thrusted into the 90s. And he was cryogenically frozen to do it, for that to happen. I'm like, how is that applicable in Pokemon? How can I make that work? And so I'm thinking on it, and I'm like, well, fossil Pokemon are kind of like that. They've been asleep for much longer, but they've been, preserved and then resurrected into the future, or present in this case. So that's not totally dissimilar. But then which one do I use? And I'm like thinking, okay, none of the Kantos work, none of the Hoenns work, none of the Sinnoh work. Turtle, Archaeopteryx, no. Tyrant, no. None of the Gaolers work at all. So I'm like, okay, one of these got to work. And I realized, well, there is one that kind of works, and that's Aurorus. And it only works because, A, it's a very beautiful Pokemon. It's kind of feminine in nature. And Austin would probably be like, "You beautiful baby. I love you, Aurorus. You're my babe." It's like, Aurorus. But also, it's an ice type. In terms of cryogenics, this would be your Fossilmon to go to because it's the only actual ice type among the Fossilmons. So, I mean, I like at least in concept. This is, though, among any of these, if I were to get rid of, change out one for something else and for a different idea, this is the one I would swap. Definitely. Like Cryogonal, for example, could work because it really has cryogenic in its name, or cryo in its name. But it's just a giant sentient ice cube. That's the only, or snowflake. That's the only thing or reason behind that, that could even mildly work. Otherwise, I like at least 2/3 of this list. I like Inteleon, I like Throh, I like Salazzle. I even like Golduck, and Celebi's they're just kind of as of a plot necessity. But Aurorus is the one that if I were to be like, which one must go, it'd be Aurorus. And then if you could figure out something that goes with it, I'd love to hear it. But no, but still, I do like overall the team. In terms of balance, it's actually a pretty well-balanced team. You do have 2 mono water types, which is, grass and electric are still going to run right through those guys. But you have 1 mono fighting type. You have a lot of monos on. Actually, 50% of this team is mono. 1 mono fighting type. You also have a poison fire type, which helps mitigate at least the weakness to grass on the water side. You have a grass psychic type, and you have a nice rock type. So you actually have a pretty good balance of a team here. There isn't any real strong weakness on this team, which is good. I mean, 2 Mon are, again, weak to grass and electric. But beyond that, there no more than 2 Mon share a serious weakness. I mean, Salazzle's is ×4 weak to ground, but not much again. And Aurorus is ×4 weak to fighting, if I'm not mistaken, and it's ×4 weak to something else, I think. No, ground is weak against ice, not the other way around. So, but either way, it's ×4 weak to fighting, and if I'm not mistaken, psychic, and Celebi is ×4 weak to bug of all things. But generally speaking, all of their weaknesses are compensated by something else. Aurorus' weakness is compensated by Celebi being a psychic type. Salazzle's weakness is compensated by the 2 water types. The bug type is compensated by Salazzle. Psychic is compensated. Actually, the psychic weakness of Throh is the only one that's really not compensated for. Because even the flying type weakness is compensated by Aurorus. And the fairy type weakness it has is compensated by the poison. So it's really not a terribly unbalanced team, all things considered. You have 1 real heavy hitter, whether you're Celebi being as mythical. And then you have a big tank in the form of Throh. You have your special attackers like Aurorus and Salazzle. And then you have your speedy, and Salazzle's also pretty fast too. Then you have your quick hitter like Salazzle and Inteleon. And then Golduck's just there for some extra support. So it's really not that bad, all things considered, for an actual team. If you wanted to balance that out any further, you'd probably just put a different typing. You'd either swap out Inteleon or Golduck for a Mon with a different typing among any of these, like a dragon or a ghost or something. Either way, though, that's my thoughts. What do you think? About this team? You like it? You hate it? Let me know your thoughts. Until then, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.